Now, avoiding this extra GET request was one thing I wanted to improve. There is another thing. If we reload the app, we see no items added yet for a fraction of a second whilst the request is on its way. So until the data is there, until we have the response. And that's of course not a great user experience. It would be better to show some loading spinner or anything like that until the data is there, instead of this no items added yet text, which is simply wrong in this situation. Now, to show such a loading spinner, we can show some conditional content. For that, here in grocery list, I can get rid of this import, but that's not too important. I want to add a new variable here in grocery list state, and that would be a variable that could be called isLoading, which initially could be set to true, because we know that if this widget is rendered for the first time, we will load our items. So we can set this to true initially, and I want to set it to false once we have our data. So therefore down here, where I set my grocery items to the loaded items, I now also want to set isLoading, and I forgot the leading underscore here, so it should be underscore isLoading. And I want to set underscore isLoading to false here once I have my loaded items, because I am not loading anymore at this point. And now we can use isLoading to show different content on the screen if we are loading. So here, where I'm setting my content to this, and to this if I have items, I can add another if check, and check if isLoading is true. And we don't need to add equals equals true here, because isLoading already contains true or false, so this is enough. And if it is true, I want to set content to a center widget where the child is a circular progress indicator. And this is a built-in widget that simply renders a loading spinner. And that's the content I want to display on the screen if isLoading is true. And with this change made, with this tiny addition made, you see this loading spinner initially. Of course, only for the fraction of a second, since the response arrives pretty quickly, typically. But this is now a better experience, because a loading spinner, of course, makes more sense than this fallback text, which was simply incorrect. Now, the loading spinner we added to the grocery list is also something we might want to add to new item. Because there, of course, if I am adding a new item, like beef, and I click add item, nothing happens for a fraction of a second before we then go back here. And if the request takes a bit longer, which also sometimes happens, we might be stuck on this page for 1 or 2 or 3 seconds until we navigate away. And in all that time, the user doesn't know what's happening, and they might even press the add item button again, which would lead to another HTTP request being sent again. So therefore, I definitely want to disable add item and reset. I want to disable these buttons whilst a request is on its way. And I also want to show a loading spinner to tell the user that something's happening behind the scenes. Therefore, here in the new item file, we also want to add a new state variable, isSending. Sounds like a sensible name. And initially that's false here, because when this widget is loaded for the first time, we're not sending any data yet. But I want to set this to true if we made it into this validate block here, because I know that here we then save the data and we're sending the data thereafter. So after calling save, we can execute set state and set isSending to true here. And now we can use this isSending information to update the UI. Down there where we have the buttons, I want to disable the button if we are sending. And in Flutter, a button can be disabled by simply passing null to onPressed instead of a function. So here I want to set the value of onPressed with help of a ternary expression, which might sound strange since we're creating a function here, but keep in mind, in Flutter, functions are just values, so we can treat them like any other value. Therefore, here I can check if isSending is true. And if that's the case, using a ternary expression here, I want to set onPressed to null instead of this function, which is my fallback case. So that this function is used as a value for onPressed if isSending is false, but if it's true, null is used. And we do the same down here. IsSending, and if that is true, we use null, otherwise we use saveItem here, the function. So that's the first step. I also want to replace the child content of elevated button. Instead of showing this text here, we could show a text like saving if we are sending, or this circular progress indicator, and that's what I'll do. For this here, we can also check isSending down here with a ternary expression, and check if isSending is true, in which case here I want to render a sized box with a height of 16 and a width of 16, which I simply set to make sure that this circular progress indicator has the right size. And then we can set the size here to circular progress indicator again, as we did it before. And the fallback value still is our const text. And this size box here can also be const. So now we're setting this here as a value if isSending is true, and this text otherwise. And with those changes made, if we now save this and reload, if I go back here and I add apples here, 5 pieces. If I click add item, you have to watch closely because it will all happen pretty fast. But if I now click add item, you'll see the buttons were disabled and you could briefly see that loading spinner. And that's how you can manage the loading state, or the sending state to be precise, on this add a new item screen as well.